And so at that point, if you're always reacting, then you're never actually driving growth or being proactive. Most leaders or most organizations see risk as really frameworks, compliance, controls. That's really what people focus on. But in reality, what really matters from an executive and the individuals that we're specifically building our platform for is like, am I going to lose my job? Like, could I prevent this? How much money is it going to cost the business? Because at the end of the day, the controls, frameworks, that's great. Compliance is not actual being risk resilient. You could have every document in your document repository, you could have every control in place, but at the end of the day, that's not going to, the risk environment is extremely dynamic. That's not going to predict or prevent something from happening. It's going to put you at a baseline that everyone should have. But remember, frameworks and controls are really built, or specifically, frameworks are built for Gen Pop, right? Like the general populace to be able to use and implement. When we think about risk, you have to think beyond that. So, as an executive, it's the same thing with me, whether I was in the FBI, the military, or EY, or even now running this company. And this is the same group that we're actually speaking to now, building our platform for because there's no tool in market for them. Is like, is it going to come back to me that I missed something? Could I prevent it? Could I have prevented this? And then is it going to cost me my job? If not, how much money are we going to lose? And when I go back to my time in the FBI or the military, it also has to do with lives. Like, so how do you actually understand and prevent that from happening? So thinking of risk beyond just documents and paperwork and frameworks, that's that is risk management at its basic foundation. Those are core things that everybody should be doing. But if everybody's doing the exact same thing, that doesn't mean that you're predicting anything, you're identifying it before it happens. That doesn't mean your job is safe. Like I used to tell people when I was back in at EY, if you did not hire me, I'm not your friend. And so, like, at the end of the day, like, what tools do you have in place so you can understand what is your actual risk resilience posture look like? How do you predict that risk? How do you identify it? And how do you actually understand it? Because at the end of the day, if it's not tied down to the impact on the business, when you think about people, process, and technology, and think about it from a financial perspective, if it, as my daughter says, if it doesn't make sense, it does. What's the word she says? I can't even think of the terms. The actual quote is really focused on if I'm impacted from a dollar standpoint, like what's the actual monetary value of the risk? How much is it going to cost me to mitigate it? And how much is it costing the business? If I can't speak to it from a financial aspect, or I cannot articulate what is the impact of the risk. So think of it as first, second, third order effects. So what's the first thing that happens right after the risk? What is the cascading impact of that? And then what's the long term impact of it on the business? So when you take that into a real world example, if you think about it, everybody talks about risks. It's like, oh, cyber, but cyber cascades across the business. We put it into the silo, but it impacts people, it impacts operations, and it impacts the bottom line at the end of the day. So, how do you articulate, understand what's that cascading ripple effect of a risk across the business? And simply put, risk has nothing to do with just compliance. Focus on it beyond that. Think about all the things that are blocking your company from growth or making money or just staying resilient and maturing that organization or your program. So when we think of risk, it's like thinking about it from the old Brad Pitt movie. It's like, don't talk about Fight Club if you're in Fight Club. So don't even use the word risk. Focus on like the things that are blockers or detracting away from the bottom line or from you being able to do your job or to keep your job as an executive because there's so many blind spots. There's so much noise right now. It's hard to understand where you need to focus on, what's going to impact you, and what are the tools that are out there. Most tools that are in market right now are built to sit down buried in the security of the cyber team or in some operational team, and then you're getting secondhand information at the end of the day. Our tool is built for the decision maker, for the P&L owner that actually has to make the decision to grow the business, but then also protect the business from those exposures, aka risk. Yeah, so it's focusing on what matters most to your specific business. So for us, we take an intelligence approach by use an example. If you were going to go out and make a Thanksgiving dinner, so for me, either if I'm going to go get produce from whichever grocery supplier that's out there or grocery store that's out there, or if I'm going to go out and I'm going to order my smoked turkey and cheat and get the one from the barbecue place. And then what ingredients do I need to be able to make that a successful dinner or a very good tasting dinner. So for us, it's been able to come up with those requirements like your shopping list and then figured out where I can go get that information. So it's different sources. So for us, there's 230,000 plus sources around the globe that we're digesting to help you understand what's impacting your business. So whether it's signals for a manufacturer from supply chain disruption or geopolitical risk, or if it's a reputational risk because one of your ingredients in your beverage could be a sensitive topic when it comes to a regulator. How does that all tie into the business and how does it cascade? Right now, the way that we currently do that is through a bunch of RSS feeds, through a bunch of tools that are buried in what people traditionally call governance, risk, and compliance. So they're sitting in some cybersecurity person's desktop, and then there's 30 clicks to get to the information. And then the executive is reading second, third, or third hand information. But what an executive really wants to know, it's like, am I impacted? If so, what do I do? What do I do about it? And how much is it going to cost me? Those are the key questions that we're answering for our customers. And so, in order to identify those signals, just to kind of sum it up, is really focusing on what matters most to our actual organization. And at the end of the day, what's going to cost me my job? So, if I cannot articulate that, what's going to cost me our job? What could cost lives? What could cause impact to our actual revenue? And what could cause reputational damage to the business? We want to identify those signals before it actually becomes a problem. So there's an example I had with the Fortune 50 CFO. I had a conversation with him at the end of 2025. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, does this sound like your annual process? So we get around the table, and everybody gets there. You have basically your executive team or your leadership team, and everybody comes to the table when we're planning out resources or doing an annual risk assessment to plan for the next year. And there's five of us around the table, and each of us are jockeying for resources. And so what I might consider to be a risk might not be a risk to everyone else. It might not be what everyone else cares about. I used to see this back when I was in the FBI and we would do this process called threat review and prioritization. And so we would have to rank and stack of what's the biggest impact to the community that we're serving. So if you think about it, like terrorism always becomes one of them, counterintelligence becomes one, white collar crime, all these things, but there's limits to resources. And so you have to determine what matters the most. And so what people end up doing is there's a couple flavors of that. One is the hot topic of the day, right? So like right now, as we're filming this, one of the hot topics is the Venezuelan things that are going on with the oil. And so, like, people might consider that to be the hot topic. So they might over index, overextend on something that they've read in the news. But what people really need to be able to focus on in those executive teams is like, what actually matters to my specific business and how am I impacted? If I'm not impacted, then there's nothing I need to do right now. Maybe it's something that I'm watching. But one of the things that we continually see is people over indexing on things that don't matter. It's not going to impact their business or it's not going to impact their business today. And so how do they actually understand and prioritize that? And that's really what we do within our platform. So we allow executives to be able to ask that question and get a very tailored, bespoke, unique response specifically to their business, taking in consideration how it connects across the organization. So it's not an executive dashboard. Like we call it a command center where basically you're interacting with what we call your AI risk advisor. So you can have that person in the palm of your hand that's an expert in your business and an expert on the events that are impacting you. That takes a team of people to do. Like right now, when I would do that as a consultant, that's at least four of us that are coming in on an engagement. Then I'm reaching back out to people in the firm to figure out how to actually do that. Or if I'm not an expert in the area, I got to go find someone else that is. And then at the end of the day, by the time it gets like to the decision maker, that information is watered down and it could be late. So timing is always critical. What are the blockers that are stopping your business from growing? Right. So in simple, if you're not going to use the word risk, like focus on the things that are taken away from the margins, from the bottom line. What are the things that could be impacting the growth or the business being resilience or driving maturity? So whether it's around people or having the right talent, whether it's attrition, whether it's everybody knows every cyber risk because that's the one that gets talked about a lot, or whether it's from an operational standpoint, whether it's quality or safety, or whether it's a regulatory risk, like how does that actually impact the business? So we might think that's a compliance thing, but if I have to pay a fine, then that's a financial and operational risk. So how do I actually understand that and think about those things? Because as an executive, as a leader, our primary job is is mitigating risk to the business, right? So we're removing those roadblocks so we can continue to be successful. Because if you're not first, you're last, right? So like everybody, I love a good Ricky Bobby quote. But one of the things, if you're always reacting to risk at the end of the day, then you're just playing catch up. And so at that point, if you're always reacting, then you're never actually driving growth or being proactive. And so when you think about it, I use a sports analogy piece, right? So if you were going to start, if you're going to start a game and then you just show up with no game plan. Yes, everybody's just like, hey, after the first snap or after you get hit in the mouth, then the game plan is out the door. There's some truth to that, but also before that, what you did before you show up to the game is you did preparation. You practice. Unless you're Allen Iverson talking about practice, what's practice? Even Allen Iverson still practiced, minus the time he didn't show up. But at the end of the day, like what really matters is the fact that you had an initial plan of where to start and then you adjusted because that's called leadership. And so in order to do that, you have to have resources. You have to have the right team in place. Have to be able to understand, like, how do I actually have I seen this scenario before? If I have, then what was the actual play that we called in that scenario when it goes back to practice? Or it's like running a 2 minute drill. Like you have to practice what that 2 minute drill looks like for it to be somewhat successful. So you have a starting point of how to mitigate that. So if you're always just playing catch up or reacting to the trend of the day, then you're not actually running a resilient or a business that's able to grow and sustain that. And so, as a leader, when you think about it, when you put it back to the person, if that person is always reactive and coming and telling me what I used to call in the FBI classified news reporting, like what value does it have for the American people? But what value does it have to actually protecting lives? And that's really what we want to focus on. Like, how do we identify and predict it from happening? How do we predict it before it happens? Or how do we identify the indicators or when it does happen, how do we have the right resources or the tools in place so we can charge through that chaos? Ricky Bobby, shake and bake. Yeah.